Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. I'm so excited to film today's video because I'm going to be talking about my favourite podcasts, and podcasts are actually like one of my favourite like media platforms. I started listening to podcasts like 2-3 years ago I think now, and it's definitely got to the point where I have like a solid list of favourite ones that I will always listen to. I look forward to them every single week. So there's about 6 or 7 that I've got notes down here, so that's what I'm looking at. There's about 6 or 7 that I'm going to talk about. Sort of, some of them are very, like, not very similar to each other. Some of them are sort of similar vibes, and then there's some ones that are kind of different. But yeah, all the links to every podcast that I mention, as well as like social media and stuff for the podcasts, will be linked in the description box down below. And I hope you're just excited to hear about them and you'll take some of my recommendations. So the first one that I'm going to talk to you about is Gals on the Go. I love this podcast. It's hosted by Brooke Micchio and Daniel Carolyn. They're both YouTubers. I also absolutely love their YouTube channels. And it's sort of a podcast aimed at my age, maybe a bit older, but like Danielle's in college and Brooke is like her first year out of college. So it's a really good podcast for that sort of age group, and I love it. Sometimes they have guests, but they also just talk with each other, have different topics every week, really relevant topics. And they also every week share their like highlight and low light, which I find really interesting because it's nice to remember that people have like low lights as well, and honestly just to hear other people's low lights, if that makes sense. I also find it just really a motivating podcast. Both of them are really productive. Like, they have done so well in their like careers and in college and everything. So yeah, it's a really motivating podcast to listen to. It always motivates me when I listen to it on a Wednesday. Yeah, I really think you should check it out. It's so good. Next one that I love, I haven't actually listened to this one as much recently, but that's just because I got behind and I need to catch up, is Happy Place by Fern Cotton. So Fern Cotton is like a TV presenter in the UK, and this podcast focuses on sort of people's mental health and their journeys with it. So or like how people find their happy place, basically. So she'll have people on, like different celebrities or well-known people, and just talk to them and interview them about their lives and about their mental health and ways that they've overcome that. And yeah, I just find it really interesting to hear the stories behind people. Like, I remember she did an episode of Dawn French, who's the Vicar of Dibley, and I just found that so interesting to hear her story and find out more about her. I absolutely love Fern's podcast, and I definitely recommend checking it out. The next one is called Power Hour. This is one of the first podcasts that I started listening to when I started listening to podcasts. It's run by like, she's sort of like an influencer fitness person called Adrienne Herbert. She's super into like morning routines and fitness and stuff like that. So the podcast sort of focuses on each person that she interviews, she asks them about their morning routine as well as like their career and stuff, so it's just fully interesting. And I find morning routines fascinating, and like they're super important to the day, so to have a whole podcast sort of centered around them is really interesting. And Adrienne herself, she basically has an hour in the morning where she wakes up. I think she wakes up at about 5 a.m, which I used to do last year sometimes because of the podcast. And she has like an hour before the rest of the world are awake just to start with her day, work out, do some emails, anything like that. And she talks to people with like loads of different morning routines. So like not everybody wakes up at 5 a.m. and is really productive. Some people would like just wake up like an hour before they need to leave the house, or like 20 minutes before they need to leave the house. But it's just interesting to hear like everybody's different routines, and yeah, I actually need to catch up on that one as well, so I might listen to it later. The next one I want to talk about is the Mile Higher podcast, which is a bit of a different vibe from the ones that I've just spoken about. So the Mile High podcast is run by a YouTuber called Kendall Ray and her husband Josh. And on Kendall's YouTube channel, she does lots of like true crime videos or like mystery videos, conspiracy theories, that sort of thing. And so on the podcast, they cover the same sort of things, but in like really long, in-depth videos. They also do like a little news roundup at the start of every episode, which I really like. For example, their like most recent episode is the mysterious disappearance of Amelia Earhart. I know they've also done some ones that I really enjoyed, which was about the 5 most powerful families in the world. They were really interesting. So yeah, if you're into that sort of stuff, like true crime, conspiracy theories, that sort of vibe, I definitely recommend that podcast. It's really interesting. I used to always listen to it in college when I would be like revising in the library and stuff by myself. Like, not that I was always by myself, but like if I was by myself, I would listen to that, because it's so long. So it's really good for like a long car journey, any long period of time where you want to listen to something. The next one is the podcast that I've started listening to the most recently, and that is Recovering from Reality, which is Alexis Haynes' podcast. Alexis Haynes was in The Bling Ring, which, if you don't know, I recommend looking it up. Or there is a film based on it, but like it's not entirely accurate, but it's really interesting. And so since she was in The Bling Ring, which was basically like a group of teenagers in LA who burgled the houses of celebrities like Paris Hilton and Lindsay Lohan. But since she was in The Bling Ring, she's really like turned her life around, and I think she's quite like inspirational in that way. So after I found out about The Bling Ring, I found out about her podcast, and I've been listening to a couple of episodes of it, and I just know it's going to be one of my favourites, so I thought I would include it. So far I've listened to the ones where she talks about her life and sort of her life story. She also has interviews with different people. She talks about like ways that you can change your life. For example, her most recent one is called Being an Ally in Your Own Transformation with Alison Stoner. She's also interviewed people such as Mojo and just other people. But yeah, I just find it really interesting. I love hearing like lots of different stories through podcast forms and stuff. So yeah, I can't wait to like delve into that one more. So this one's like a super random one for me because it isn't really the sort of thing you would expect me to be listening to. Because it isn't for my demographic at all, but I just find it absolutely hilarious. So it's called Never Thought I'd Say This, and it's Jodie Sweeten's and Celia Bayhouse podcast. So I found out about it because I follow Jodie Sweeten on Instagram, because she is the girl that plays Stephanie Tanner in Full House and Fuller House, and she was like, oh, I've started a podcast. So I looked and listen to it, and it's meant to be for mums and parents and stuff, but I just find it really funny. They talk about like weird things that their children have done, and it's called Never Thought I'd Say This because they start each episode with something that they never thought they would say, and it's hilarious. If you want like a comedy funny podcast, definitely look that one up. And actually, I need some more funny podcasts because I feel like all of mine can be sometimes quite like intense and deep and like motivating, but I need some more funny ones. So let me know in the comments any funny podcast recommendations that you have. So the next one is also a bit of a rogue one, and it's the Riverdale Register. So this is hosted by John Padden and Caitlin Riley, and it is literally just a recap podcast about the TV show Riverdale. I actually kind of love, kind of hate Riverdale, so but I feel like the podcast just really enhances the show, and sometimes I actually look forward to the podcast more than the show. So yeah, if you watch Riverdale and like me, you're like, what is the show? I really recommend listening to the podcast because the way they talk about it and like analyze it and everything is like really good, really interesting, really funny, and really interesting actually. Like I feel like I've learned a lot about how TV works through listening to the podcast. Okay, and the final podcast that I'm going to talk about is The Fringe of It. This podcast is hosted by Olivia Purvis and Charlotte Jacqueline. They're both like, I think they're bloggers. Yeah, they're both bloggers and Instagrammers. And they just talk about different topics every week. I think they sometimes have guests, but I tend to just listen to it if it's just them. But my favourite bit about it is they have like a telly talk segment that they talk about at the start of every episode, and I just really like hearing about the different TV they've been watching. It gives me like ideas of what to watch, or if I've been watching it, it's interesting to hear people talking about it. So like they spoke about this TV show on Netflix, Unorthodox, and I just watched that with my family, but I didn't really know anyone else who had watched it, so I hadn't been able to discuss it with anybody, and they talked about it. And yeah, it's just interesting to hear more about shows and stuff like that. I mean, they're not a telly podcast, but that's my favourite part of their podcast. And then they'll talk about like their week and different topics and stuff. And yeah, I just really like their podcast. It's definitely one of my favourites, and I also always look forward to that every week. So yeah, that is a roundup of all of my favourite podcasts. I hope you found this interesting. It's definitely a bit of a different video for me. But comment down below if you have any other podcast recommendations, because I'm always looking out for different ones to try. As I said before, all the podcasts will be linked in the description box below, so you can go down there to check them out. I hope you enjoyed them all, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you. Bye.
Hey guys, so I just wanted to pop on to the end of this video to speak about the current situation happening in America. I'm sure a lot of you will have already heard about it, and you'll have signed all the petitions and done everything you can to help, but I really didn't want to upload this video without any mention of it. So I'm going to be leaving some petitions, some resources and some donation things in the description box down below, and I really hope that you will sign them if you haven't already, share them with your family and friends, and carry on speaking up whenever you can, because this is so important and it's happening over and over again. And I just really want this to be a community where we do something for good and we help and we raise awareness of issues. So I really hope that you'll have a look at the petitions, sign them and share them like I've said. And also, if you have any questions, please put them in the comment section, and I'll be so happy to answer any questions that you have. And I do want to do some sort of video more in depth about all of this soon, but I just want to make sure that I get it right. So yeah, please sign the petitions down below. I hope you're all staying safe and that you're all okay. And I'll see you next week. Bye.